Heritage Words, a podcast about the words we've inherited from our ancestors and the meaning they bring to our lives. Heritage Words is produced by the HUC-JIR Jewish Language Project, which raises awareness about Jewish ancestral diversity through the lens of language. I'm your host, Sarah Bunin Benor. Our guest today is Galeet Dardashti. Galeet is an anthropologist and a musician and a composer, and she's earned a reputation as a trailblazing and award-winning performer and scholar of Middle Eastern Jewish culture. Galeet has a PhD in anthropology, and her research focuses on Mizrahi cultural politics. She's taught at NYU and the Jewish Theological Seminary, and she recently completed a fellowship at University of Pennsylvania. As a performer, Dardashti is widely known as the leader and founder of Divan, and from her solo release, The Naming, an album I love to listen to. And she recently released a new album called Monajat, where she sings with her grandfather, remixed samples of her grandfather, who was a famous Iranian singer. And she also co-created the award-winning podcast, The Nightingale of Iran, about her family's Persian musical legacy. If you heard that podcast, then you know a lot already about Galeet's family history. And today we're going to dig into some of that, especially focusing on language. Welcome to the show, Galeet.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, today, let's start by talking about the very first language that your parents bequeathed to you, your name. Tell us about your full name. First, tell us your full name.
Okay, my full name is Galeet June Dardashti. And by the way, I forgot, and I also have a Hebrew name, Yoela.
So Galeet is not your Hebrew name?
I know, and I did the same thing. We did the same thing to our children, or at least one of our children. Yeah, it's a thing. It's when you want, when you want to have a lot of names. Okay, so my first name, Galeet. There is no real interesting story to this name, except for I am the only one of my sisters that has an Israeli name or a Hebrew name. My parents just liked that name. They had some friends who would name their child Galeet, and they had been in Israel and heard the name, and they just thought it was pretty, and it means little wave. So, Gal and Galeet. So wave, little wave. And that's my first name. And my middle name, June. So I was born in the month of June. There's that. And June in Persian means darling. And so I guess my parents thought that would be cute to name me Galeet June, because when you're talking to someone that you love, or, it's just a term of endearment, like, Galeet darling, Galeet June. And so they thought it would be cute if they gave me the middle name June. And I am also the only one in my family that has a Persian name. So I'm very excited about that. And then my last name, Dardashti or Dardashti or Dardashti, depending on who I'm speaking to. That is a Persian name. And in fact, my family in Iran, we were one of the first to actually adopt a surname in Iran. That was like in the late 1800s that that our family took on the name Dardashti, and it means from Dardasht. And Dardasht was a Jewish neighborhood in Isfahan. And you probably would only call yourself Dardashti once you left Dardasht, right? Because if you're living there, then, you're just Farid, or you're just, you're whoever you are. Um, so, uh, so yeah, in the late 1800s, when my family left Isfahan for Tehran, that's when they took on Dardashti. And apparently, everyone who's named Dardashti is from Isfahan, can traced the roots to Isfahan. And supposedly they're all related to me, but I'm not really sure if that's totally true. Because there are a lot of Dardashtis. And that's the story of my name. Oh, and Yoela, my father's uh, grandfather was Yoel, and that's how I'm named after him, Yoela.
Oh, thank you. Now, I noticed that on your podcast, you and your sister pronounce your last names differently. Was there a time when you started to change your pronunciation of your last name?
Yeah, well, I think we've for a long time, by the way, pronounced our last names differently. Danielle was a news reporter, a TV news reporter, and she would pronounce it Dardashti. And I never pronounced it. I never pronounced it that way. I think because my parents had adopted a, I don't know if it's maybe what they thought was either more American or maybe what they thought was more Israeli friendly. And so it had been ever since I grew up, we were Dardashti. And no dash. And I guess probably I started more so when I'm in Israel, unless I'm talking to Iranians, it's Dardashti. That's how I pronounce it because that's how people kind of can understand it. And I guess it's easier for people here too, but more and more as I've kind of gotten deeper into understanding and becoming more familiar with my family background, which I think I didn't grow up with so much of a connection to my family background. Um, yeah, more and more I've realized that the correct pronunciation was Dardashti. And so I started kind of shifting and changing it that way. And yeah, and I guess Danielle, you can ask her. I'll let her explain. But interestingly, she started using I'm Danielle Dardashti, which is kind of closer to the Persian. I'm not sure if she was aware of that or not, but yeah, that's how I think it really depends on who I'm speaking to and how I kind of want, um, yeah, in terms of how I pronounce it. But I like Dardashti because I think it's pretty, and that's how it was pronounced in Iran.
Mhm. And your younger sister, Michelle, who's not part of the podcast but is mentioned in it, how does she pronounce the last name?
Oh, definitely, she pronounces it as we grew up, Michelle
Dardashti.
Dardashti. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wow. So let's give the audience who hasn't heard your podcast just a general summary of your family history, where your ancestors are from, where they moved to, and where you grew up.
Yeah. So, my father's family is from Iran, grew up in Tehran, and we can maybe talk more about that because I've definitely written. I've now talked about it quite a bit, and now it's in the podcast. Speak about it a lot in my artistic work. So yeah, my family came from Iran on my dad's side. On my mom's side, oh, and my dad came to this country when he was 19. My On my mom's side, um, they're Ashkenazim, and um, my mom's great my mom's grandparents, my great grandparents, immigrated from Poland slash Russia, um, depending, uh, in uh, yeah, in the like right before World War II. And actually, my great grandfather won a sweepstakes, and he had money to come to the United States. So that there's that lore in my family. But yeah, came to New York, and so um, my mom has been a New Yorker for, and her family they lived in New York since my great grandparents came, and yeah, that's my ancestry.
Okay, so tell us about the languages they spoke.
So my uh my maternal grandparents spoke Yiddish, and my grandmother was very involved in the kind of um, socialist movement, and in speaking Yiddish with that whole, that whole community, that whole historical movement. And I learned also, I never learned Yiddish from my grandmother or my grandfather. My grandmother was much more into Yiddish and much more active in speaking Yiddish, and went to like Yiddish group, till through when she retired in Florida, we would get together and speak with her friends in Yiddish. But my great grandmother, I'm very lucky to have known her. I mean, she was the one, who had the accent and spoke Yiddish, and called me a tired kint when I was little, and I said, I'm not tired. Of course, not knowing that that meant I was a sweet girl. Um, and uh, so I heard a lot of Yiddish from my mom's side, and I was actually closer to my mom's family. We would see them more often, and I learned a lot of Yiddish songs from my grandmother and from my mom. By the way, so I'd say Yiddish on that side, and then um, on my father's side, so he spoke Persian, but I didn't. So he and his all of his siblings, and my dad actually grew up in Iran, so it was his native tongue. But I never learned Persian. My father never had any saw no reason to ever teach me Persian. Made sure that I learned Hebrew like a nice Jewish girl. And I learned that in, a few years of day school, and then more years of Hebrew school, Hebrew high, and then university, grad school. Um, but Yeah, no Persian, but I would hear it. I would hear it um, growing up. I heard my dad speaking to his siblings and to his parents, and but not so many friends, because we were really not very connected to the Persian Jewish community, or non-Jewish Persian community.
So how did you hear your dad speaking to his relatives? Was it phone conversations or the audio tapes that they exchanged?
Oh, no, I never heard the audio tapes
Uh-huh.
until very recently when we did the podcast. But no, through yeah, we would get together with our cousins, and it depended where we lived. We did live in LA briefly, and then I heard more. Um, I lived in LA from like age 6 to 13, so I would definitely hear more Persian then. Not a ton, but more Persian then. And we were connected to some of our family in LA that was that was Persian. And yeah, I would hear my father on the phone. We would get together and see our cousins, and our uncles and aunts, and we would hear Persian, and we would have Persian food, and my savta would make us Persian food, and we would get together when we were in Israel, Florida, New Jersey. So yeah, I mean, here and there, I would of course hear Persian, and my mom learned some Persian before we were born. So my mom would kind of speak a little bit of Persian with my family, and they would all laugh at her Persian. But she was very cute with her Persian. But none of us ever learned or saw any reason to learn. It just never occurred to us when we were younger.
Yeah. Well, I will ask you about the heritage words that were passed down to you, but first, you mentioned Yiddish songs.
Mm.
What Yiddish songs did you learn from your mom and your grandma?
Oh God. So many. I mean, of course, we were a singing family. As I know you know, we sang professionally, my sisters and I, my two sisters and my parents. And there was a good amount of Yiddish in those performances. So Hobin Mir Nigendol was a standard in our performances and in our medleys. um, those were the years of medleys, and I'm trying to remember what else we sang. I mean, I know a ton of Yiddish songs like Oifen Pripachuk. Ooh, that one's um I'm a little out of touch with my Yiddish songs, but I mean, I probably know maybe 8 Yiddish songs that I could probably sing well. And when my grandmother who had Alzheimer's, in the end, that was kind of the only way I could connect with her was singing these Yiddish songs. I'd bring my guitar and we would sing because really we couldn't communicate in any other way. But it was amazing. She still could sing these Yiddish songs. So, um, oh yeah, like Rajan Kiss mit Mandolin, songs like that. Some of the some of the classics.
Hmm. My grandmother also had Alzheimer's, and I didn't start learning Yiddish until after she died, but she and I had learned some Yiddish songs, and I did sing those with her near the end, and it
Mm,
was a nice connection, very special.
yeah. I
Yeah.
know it's really amazing about, language and memory and music specifically. I'm just kind of that was kind of amazing to me. So yeah, I was really I was really happy that I could connect with her in that way, and I loved singing those Yiddish songs. That was a really fun connection to my heritage, which I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to hear that music really was and is the major way that I have connected to my family ancestry.
Yeah. So the you mentioned that you called your dad's mom Savta. Was that because she lived in Israel at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually when we were very young and we were growing up, I think they lived in Florida. They had moved to Florida for a while. And then I think it was as I got older they moved back to Israel. But I think the my dad and his siblings, they brought them to Florida because there were a bunch of them living in Florida, and so it just made sense. They could, be near them. But then everyone kind of moved to different places, and my aunt moved back to Israel. My uncle was living in Israel for a while with his family, so they moved back to Israel. I don't know. I think it was just that that's what they wanted to be called. It never again it calling them by their Persian, a Persian name was just not. Um, I don't know why. I mean that actually is a question that I haven't really thought about. Um, I'll have to ask my dad why there was no, like why we didn't call them their Persian names. But they were, I don't know, maybe they were already far removed at that point from Iran, and they liked being called Saba and Safta. They had probably already undergone their kind of, their transition to Zionism and immigration to Israel, and that maybe that was why. But there
Mhm.
could be many reasons.
And your other grandparents, did you call them grandma and grandpa?
Yes, we called them grandma and grandpa.
So let's move on to your heritage words. Do you so you mentioned that your grandma used to call you Tayere Kind, dear child. What other words do you remember hearing from your grandparents on either side?
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a lot. There was definitely a lot of Yiddish um, spoken. I the words, though, I have to admit that um, that kind of stuck with me more were the words that I guess I found funny and like ongopachka. Right. I mean, that was a word that my mom did use a lot and that we still, that's a word that that's still in my vocabulary. I think part of the reason is, first of all, it sounds funny. Ongopachka meaning like, um, like gaudy things that don't go together well. My mom would be like, "Do you like this outfit or is it too ungapachka?" Like, stuff like that. And it would just that would make me giggle and I would laugh really hard just because the word is just so long and funny and sounds funny. And like or machetenister. So my mom, when she would be like, "Well, my machetenister," she would kind of be like funny when using it because her machetenister was my safta, who was, very Persian. So it particularly sounded funny, that mother-in-law, the
Yeah,
word for mother-in-law.
yeah,
So,
that's
so I think,
ironic. Yeah.
say that again.
Oh, that's a nice ironic
Yeah,
use of that term. And so it
exactly.
sounds like she would say it in kind of a humorous way.
I think so. I think, she would, and my mom understands a lot of Yiddish. She doesn't speak a lot of it, but so I think when she did use it, it was kind of like ironic, or yeah, like she was kind of like it was like for show a little bit, kind of in the way that I use some of the Persianness, some of it that I have, and we can get to that. Um, we can get to that later, but the words that have stuck. I was thinking, in preparation for my talk with you, the words that have stuck are words that are either made up or not entirely made up. So I'm going to tell you something that is a secret. I'm going to tell you one of our secret words. And hopefully, people will kind of keep it on the down low who hear this podcast because, this is like my secret family word. I hope I don't get in trouble for exposing my family. But the main word that has continued in my family from Yiddish is HS, which stands for Hob Sechel,
Mm,
have sense.
mm,
And the way that my family uses it is my so my mom said that she thinks it started being used by it was my my great grandfather would say HS if he was, or just like HS, if he wanted them to like know that maybe he was like trying to negotiate, and don't say that this thing that he's negotiating about is too beautiful because then we can't get as good of a price. Or if somebody, if you're saying like, oh, this person's sick, and then they're like walking over to you, you have, be discreet. It's basically means like be discreet. Hob sechel. So that is very much still used in my family. So now our code word is HS. And the other word that is made up that is not Yiddish, but it sounds like it is, and it was invented, according to my mom, by my grandmother's cousin B, and that is the word pochel, and that's the word for flatulence. That's the fart word. And I said to my mom, I don't understand, why did you have to invent a word? Like, didn't you have a word for that? And she said, oh no, because Jews don't fart. So I don't understand why they needed to invent that word, but basically that is a word that is used in my immediate family. That is like the word. We don't really say fart. We say puchel. So,
That
so
is
I don't know where it came from. I would like to know from maybe if there is another word in Yiddish for that, because I don't know one, but maybe they didn't have to use a Jewish word for it. I really I don't know.
okay. We
Do you
will
know?
research that and get back to
I
you.
think you must get to the bottom of this.
Yes, we will find the origin of puchel and other synonyms in Yiddish.
Perfect.
So that you said you use that in your family. That's pretty common to use words from an ancestral language for euphemisms, for things that we feel uncomfortable saying in our primary language.
Mm,
And
yes.
not just to be secretive, so that if someone's at your house and you say puchel, they won't know that you meant fart, but also just because it feels weird to say that. And so in my house, we said pish instead of urinate,
Oh,
um,
yes.
also from Yiddish. So
Right.
another example. And a few of the other people that I've interviewed have talked about similar words in their home for body parts or bodily functions or things that
Absolutely.
death, things that people are afraid of, are
Oh.
sometimes also used from other languages.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so those are the words on the, Ashkenazi side that that are used. And on the Persian side, as I told you, there is like not a lot of I didn't have a lot of contact, but there are, of course, words that the primary word that my family uses from our Persian ancestry is ta'aruf. And ta'aruf is such an interesting concept. There is nothing like it in um in American culture. And ta'aruf, what it is in Persian culture, it's this kind of this this game that you play, this etiquette game, right? It's uh um this game that you play when it's like standing on ceremony, that let's say you're at someone's house and you're starving, but they ask you, would you like something to eat? And you know that the rules are such in Persian culture that it's rude to be like, yes, I'm so hungry. Can I please have some food? So you say, oh, no, no, no. I'm not hungry. I'm fine. Thank you. And so then they know they're supposed to ask again, oh, no, no, you must eat. Please, I would like to give you some food. Oh, no, no, I'm fine. And then they have to basically push it on you and say, like, no, please, please eat. And then you say, okay, okay. And then you eat. And that's the rules of ta'aruf. And um, so we joke about that all the time because um, my mom, who's not Persian, is probably the biggest ta'arofer. So we use it in that kind of way, like, oh, are you ta'arofing? Are you is that bullshit? Are you ta'arofing? Like you really are hungry. Come on, you're just trying to be polite because like we don't do ta'arof in our family. So you tell us if you're hungry, but we use that all the time. And it comes up a lot. In fact, at Passover, with the whole, you know, Persian custom of hitting each other with scallions, my dad says that he thinks Dayenu is a whole tarof thing. Like, it would have been enough if you had just given us the Torah, Dayenu. Oh, it would have been enough if you had just, open the Red Sea, but not if we hadn't like gone through the Red Sea, all this like Dayenu, like it's not really, it wouldn't have been enough, right? So my dad thinks that like the hitting each other with scallions is like a game where we're like, ha ha ha, Dayenu, like this is just a game of Tadoff. So it's like part of the game. So anyway, that's I would say the biggest part of our lexicon that we've kind of inherited from Persian culture. Now, since doing the podcast, there are other words, especially the word motreb, which which we think about a lot. And the word motreb is the word for entertainer, singer, musician. And that is a word that I knew about as a scholar, having studied Persian culture a little bit, although I shifted because I couldn't go to Iran. I shifted and started writing much more about Israel and Middle Eastern culture in Israel. So motreb means, as like the pshat, right? It means musician, but it has this pejorative connotation in Iran. And that I knew too, but it's Jews that were the primary musicians. They had no choice. There weren't really there weren't very many trades that they could participate in. And since Muslims were really prohibited from participating in music, it was, forbidden, just as like alcohol was forbidden. So, Jews, if people wanted to hear music, they had to bring in the Jews. And so Jews kind of had this motreb, this negative stereotype about musicians who were kind of like lazy and just, low class. And Jews kind of merged together in this kind of really, for Jews, this shameful way. And we kind of explore that and discovered all sorts of things that we hadn't known about this concept of motreb and the way that Jews themselves saw it in the podcast. And so the word motreb has also entered our family lexicon, really because of the podcast.
So you didn't grow up hearing that word at all?
I would talk to my dad about it when I started writing, like at the beginning of graduate school, and asked my dad about it, and he said, "Oh, well, Saba was definitely not considered a motreb. He was a very, very famous singer, my grandfather, known as the Nightingale of Iran. He was one of the most famous singers of Persian classical music, and he was adored by Muslims, and they would kind of be glued to their radios once a week when he would play on the radio." And so I asked my dad about it, but how did people though think about Saba? Was he considered a motreb? Oh, no, 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 no. So but then when we did the podcast, I found out it was a little bit more complicated. It was true that Muslims didn't see my grandfather that way, but not didn't apply. I don't want to ruin it, but it's much more complicated. You'll have to listen to the podcast to get the full story. But yeah, that kind of that was very fascinating for us to learn about. And so the word motreb, like, oh well, I'm a motreb, um so it's okay, or so that word has entered has very much entered our worlds.
Yeah. And in you mentioned the tarof word did your dad introduce that to your family and then your mom picked it up, and it sounds like it was used as a noun in Persian, but then in your family it came to also be used as a verb?
Well, you see, I don't speak Persian, so I can't really tell you how it's used. We use it in all different ways, right? Like he's tarofing. Oh yeah, stop tarofing. Um, but tarof itself is a game, and so it could be that we're completely. I think you are right, but I don't want to say 100% because I don't speak Persian to know. Um, I think it's used in a similar way in Persian, like like he's engaging in tarof, like what he's doing right now is tarof. But oh, she's a tarofer, he's tarofing. We use it. We've Englishized, or however, I'm sure anglicized. I don't know how you say it. um the the word. And but yeah, of course my dad definitely introduced it
Mhm.
to our family. And it's that's yeah, we love talking about who's the biggest tarofer, and it's usually my mom. It's usually my mom.
Okay. Are there other words that you remember hearing from your dad from Persian?
Yes. Uh there are other words, and other words that we learned from our cousins, especially, like, again, more fart words. Um we were kind of amazed by, that there were different words for like a silent but deadly. There's like a one word for it, chos versus a loud fart, which is goose. So, those were just things we would, again, it was like things we would laugh about. Um, but I think that was more from my cousins than from my dad. Um, I think though, and maybe this is just because we're musicians, or because, it's what I'm interested in. I'm much more conscious of sounds, and like, these are things that I think about a lot more. Like, things like that I've inherited from my grandmother is like, like ululation, like, that kind of thing
Wait,
is, yeah. So my grandmother's, you know, li li ling, um, that started out as me imitating her, and almost like making fun of her, to because she would do it and then I would do it, and then she would be like, "Oh my God," like that, that I was doing it. She was so excited, and it would be this kind of like really fun thing that I only did to kind of like tease her. And then it just became something that I realized I wasn't really doing it the correct way. She was kind of moving her tongue this way, and I was doing something that just mimicked what she was doing, but it sounded good, and people were like, "Oh my God, you can do that." And I was like, "Well, no, I can't really do that, but I'm doing it." So sometimes the ways that we kind of poke fun at our family members become something that it just becomes us. And I do that a lot now. I mean, when I'm, trying to express joy at an event, or and it's like, it's part of my shtick now. It started out as, me teasing my grandmother, but now it's something that I really like, I love doing, because it makes me think of my grandmother, and it's sort of the same thing. It's like why people speak these languages and why people use these words, because it keeps a part of their family um alive, right? And so I think a lot about that, even though it's not a word. It is so much my safta. When I do it, I'm totally. It's like when I sing with my grandfather. I feel like I'm with him, and I'm kind of maintaining him. And when I make that sound, I feel like I'm with my grandmother, and I'm getting emotional. But like, those are kind of some of the ways, these sounds. Or even also, I'm thinking of something that's much more, silly, but again, it's like, this is one of the few Persian things that I do, and it's a sound. When my dad or my uncles, they would get frustrated or annoyed, they'd be like, "Uh-huh." In their that's their Persian, like, "You're annoying," or, frustration sound. "Uh-huh." And and I do it sometime as a joke, and I noticed my son, he'll do it sometimes to make fun of me. And it's really just like, it's a sweet thing. I mean, it's sweet, even though it's like a tease. Sometimes these ways that we kind of poke fun are actually kind of meaningful, and sweet and touching. Something that, you wouldn't think would be, but I don't know. It kind of moved me to hear my son making those very Persian um noises. So, yeah, sometimes these things stick, and these sounds, not only words, can kind of make an impact, and sort of uh um yeah, can be moving for you and your family.
Absolutely. And even if the and I and the whatever even if they're not in the dictionary, they're still part of language, right? They're a way that we communicate with our voice. And also what you were saying about feeling you're connected to your grandparents and sort of making fun of them, but sort of becoming part of you. I mean, I think that's pretty common in, like, I wrote a paper about young American Jews' use of Yiddish, and that's a big part of it, that they're
Mm,
doing it in kind of an ironic way, but and also kind of voicing their grandparents, or even explicitly saying, as my grandma used to say, and then saying it, but it's also a part of who they are and a part of how they're keeping the memory of their ancestors alive.
absolutely. Yes. Yes. Beautifully said.
You relation from you said your dad's mom, right?
Yeah. So I, that, like, I'm very conscious of sounds, and that's kind of what I think I've kind of more, because the language, it was beyond me. There were a lot of words that I knew, I mean, that I heard and could recognize, and I studied Persian, I should say, a little bit in grad school, but they were never words that stuck. But there were things like that, like the sounds, like um my grandmother doing these sounds for joy, and for, in going to the synagogue and hearing everybody yolulate, and um that more, and just, the different sound of the music, and I should say pronunciation, the difference between the pronunciation in my grandparents' synagogue versus um in, Ashkenazi synagogues. And I'll just say one other thing that I was, like, very conscious of growing up, and that is, like, I was a bar and bat mitzvah tutor, and I was trained under my father, who was the cantor. I would train kids to lead, to chant for their bar and bat mitzvahs, and my dad was adamant about um having people pronounce the words in this kind of Sephardi way, even though, he was at an Ashkenazi synagogue. And I always assumed, erroneously, that this was because this is how he grew up in Iran, that this pronunciation that he was so focused on was the Persian pronunciation. And then, kind of like, as I grew older, I was like, wait a minute, like, this isn't the pronunciation that I hear in the Iranian synagogue. And only, like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I had this revelation in talking to my father, and I said, wait a minute, when did you become so serious about this pronunciation? He was like, oh, well, even when I was a bar mitzvah student in Iran, um, my father had to tell the gabbis not to correct my Hebrew, because I told them I was going to be pronouncing it as they do in Israel.
Wow.
And so that kind of blew my mind, that, he was a disciple in Iran for this kind of Israeli pronunciation, which he, is known for. So some of what, some of what I kind of thought was my dad's Persian pronunciation was totally wrong. It was just this way that he had decided that it should be, and that how he it was, a very kind of uh, um, like a very thoughtful move on his part for how he wanted to speak Hebrew. So a lot of it, I think, is a lot of kind of what I've inherited has to do with pronunciation and has to do with how you sing things. And also kind of correcting things that I didn't grow up with. So I didn't learn how to chant from the Torah in in Persian Tamim. I was a bar and bat mitzvah tutor in the Ashkenazi chanting of the Torah, which I do really well, and I've been doing since I started teaching it when I was 13. But when I was 30 only, um, I I had already studied Persian classical music as part of my field work, and that's when I said, "Wait a minute, Dad, I want you to teach me how to do this in the Persian style." And so that's when I started chanting in that tradition. And when my kids had their bar mitzvahs, that's how I that's how I wanted them to chant. And they did the haftarah in Ashkenazi tradition, and they, led services mostly in Ashkenazi style because it's an Ashkenazi egalitarian synagogue. I'm a woman. It would be really difficult for me to be um in a non-egalitarian synagogue because that's how I grew up. My father was a cantor in conservative with a capital C congregations. And so it's kind of just been this sort of figuring out how to bring my ancestral practices and how to transmit them to my kids um, in in a way that feels, I guess, comfortable.
Yeah, I love that you did that combination with your son. And it worked because you could teach it to him. But I wonder, other families who also had a rupture in their Jewish ritual education, in that they didn't learn the ancestral traditions of their family, is there a way that we can help to give them access to that tradition?
Yeah, I mean it's harder because I mean not only did I teach it, but my dad really taught my kids, and then I helped them, and I of course encouraged it. I mean, I was the one that initiated it and made it happen, but my dad really taught them, and that was important to me to have. I mean, it was a beautiful thing that I was able to have my father teach them. But yeah, it is harder. I mean, yeah, what do we do? I mean, we give people the tools. I'm actually redesigning my website right now, where I want to have some of those resources for people through my website because a lot of people have been asking me in the last couple years, and I finally kind of figured out how to do it because wanted to teach my kids, and I didn't have a trope sheet like you have in Ashkenazi practices, and so creating like a recording and stuff like that. Yeah, I think you got to find the people who have the knowledge, and then um but it isn't as easy. You're right, because even if you have the recording, sometimes you need a teacher to
Mhm.
kind of work with you. Um, so I think we have to be more creative about how, and I'm actually, these are some of the things that I'm actually starting to think about in all different realms as I'm kind of speaking to cantorial schools, and because there are a lot of people who are left out and want to connect to these ancestral heritages.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is something that I think about a lot.
Yeah. So I want to turn back to your ancestral languages. What uh, do you feel when you hear a word from Yiddish and from Persian? Do you have a particular association or feeling?
I mean, it makes me think of my grandparents for sure when I hear Yiddish. Um, yeah, I feel like I feel this connection to my family. But you know, because I was connected to them, I think I didn't have as much of a desire to kind of like to forge that connection. And I think that's why I kind of gravitated to doing more Persian stuff. When I hear Persian, I still don't know Persian that well. I studied it, but I still don't speak very well. So when I hear Persian, I don't know, I still feel like an outsider when I hear Yiddish. Um, I don't feel like an outsider with when I hear Yiddish for some reason. I think it's because there's so much Yiddish that it feels like, I don't know, it feels like nostalgic. It feels like, yeah, this is what I grew up with around so much Yiddish. Um, when I hear Persian, I also get kind of excited. I perk up when I hear Persian because I'm like, oh, you know, these are Iranians. But you know, Iran has so many other like connotations. Like, you know, when you hear Yiddish, it's like these are your people. They're all Jewish who are speaking Yiddish. When you hear Persian, you know, it's a kind of a range of they could be they're not I mean they're my people in a certain sense, right? Um but they're Jewish people, they're non-Jewish people. So it's kind of still a secret language to me that I feel connected to, but also distant from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, you mentioned that you learned songs from your grandfather, and in your recordings, you sing in, I think, three languages, in English, Hebrew, and Persian, right?
Well, I'm not much not so much singing in English, but
No,
there's a
that's
little bit of
on your previous recording, on the naming, you have some English, right?
maybe. God, it was so do I have it? Do I sing in English? If I do, it's very a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
a tiny, tiny bit. Yeah, I mean, so like I said, I don't speak Persian. And so connecting with my ancestral music and in Hebrew, in a language that I do speak, was the way I connected because I can hear my grandfather sing in Persian and it's so beautiful. And I connect with it on a lot of levels, especially now that I've studied Persian classical music. But when I hear my grandfather with this same Persian singing, but singing Hebrew, singing piyutim, singing the songs of Slichot, I can connect with it because I actually know what he's singing at a deeper level and I know the language. And so that's kind of what my most recent album was. It was this way that I was able to connect and sing with him, you know, and I didn't know my grandfather very well. I met him, but didn't have a shared language. Because he didn't really, you know, he didn't speak any English. And at the time, my Hebrew wasn't that good. And frankly, his Hebrew wasn't good either. And I didn't speak Persian or French. And so here was a way for me to connect with my grandfather and with my kind of Persian Jewishness by not only singing Persian music, but singing with him. And that was the big project in Monajat. This album that I recorded was that I also composed my own music in Hebrew, some piyutim that I composed that I wanted to bring in that I thought were related to themes of slichot. But I could actually trade verses with my grandfather and sing, you know, a piece like Anenu or Adonai Hua Elohim. That was really just it's really exciting project for me to be able to connect in that deep way where I'm actually singing with and sometimes harmonizing with him.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really a beautiful album, and that idea of singing with your grandfather, it reminds me of the idea of heritage words, where we bring in
mm,
words from our grandparents' language into our English, and so we are connecting with them through that word. And but the way you do it in your recordings is even more intense, or even more real, that you're connecting with your grandfather because you're actually singing with his actual voice.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I mean, and when I sing Anenu with him, just like thinking about the words, the words are, answer us. And here I'm like answering my grandfather too, singing back and forth with him. So it is kind of it's just really exciting for me that I found a that I actually found a way that I found a way to do it.
Yeah, and the title of the album, Monajat, tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. So Monajat literally means this kind of intense prayer with God. That's what it means in Persian. And I found these recordings many years ago. I learned about these recordings that my grandfather made in Iran in the 1970s. Uh, that he made these recordings of slichot as a fundraiser for a Jewish organization. And the reason is because like he was very, very not only was he a famous singer of Persian classical music, but people adored his singing of slichot because he would sing. It was gorgeous, and people would come from all over Tehran to hear him chanting these prayers, and so he recorded them. And I had these recordings. These were like some of the only recordings of my family. I mean, of my grandfather singing in Hebrew that my family had. And then here I was like, oh, I can do something. This is Hebrew, right? But when I asked my dad, okay, these are all recordings that say that they're slichot, and then at the end there's a recording called that was listed as monajat at the very end of the slichot recording. And I said to my dad, like, what is this? What is monajat? My grandfather is singing something in Persian. That's in monajat. And my dad said, oh, I don't know exactly what it is, but it was Saba's special thing. And he would end slichot services with that piece, monajat. And I asked more people, and they were like, "Yeah, I don't know. It was his like thing. He would sing this Persian thing at the end." And so I had a Persian like colleague of mine help me translate it, and then my dad also helped me. And as it turns out, it's this poem that's written in the style of a Rumi poem. And these were the kinds of poems that my grandfather would uh, interpret as a singer of Persian classical music. But this poem, we think my grandfather wrote it, and in the style of Persian classical music, but it's all about arising to worship God, which is what actually many of the mystics like Rumi were writing about. I mean, they weren't secular, right? They were mystical poems, and and it's just this beautiful poem that he felt like it was completely normal to bring into his own Jewish practice. It felt completely natural for him to bring a Persian poem in, and I just kind of he was innovating. He was innovating his Jewish ritual practice in the in Iran, and so I kind of gave me artistic license to kind of take his pieces and sample him, which is what I do in Monajat. It kind of made me feel like, okay, my Saba did it in Iran. He was, taking artistic license that, it made me feel like I could as well. And so Monajat, I was very moved. I was very moved by his Monajat and how he so naturally there was no clear boundary between kind of religious and non-religious in his world, and what was seen as kosher really in his universe. And so that's why I named the project Monajat, because I was really I was just really inspired.
I think that was a great choice. I love it. Um,
Thank you.
so I want to give you a chance to say things that we haven't talked about yet. What other thoughts do you have about your ancestral languages, identity, community? passing things on to your children?
Yeah. Let me think. I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know what what wise knowledge I have, but
Aside from teaching your kids Persian Torah reading, are there other ways that you're incorporating your ancestral cultures in your home?
yeah, I mean, um, for me, it is much more about the sounds and about the music and about teaching my kids, whether it is Yiddish songs or um, Persian Jewish songs. That's kind of, I guess, how my family has is keeping our family in the tradition. That's what it's really about uh, in um, in the Dardashti family. Is yeah is kind of keeping in the music and the traditions as much as we can, and so that means that my son now leads part of kiddush or the hamotzi in you know doing some of the traditions that my family um, has brought down, even though we didn't grow up that way. And so for my for my own practice, and I guess this is what I the advice that I would kind of give other people that I've tried to share is that I didn't grow up with very much Persian Jewish practice. And so but you can still do it. There are still ways of bringing in traditions and practices, whatever works. For some people it's food, right? Some people it's and that to a certain extent has happened in my family, but it's more my Ashkenazi husband who's kind of continuing my family Persian traditions. But in every family, I think there are different ways, whether it is languages, whether it's words, whether it's music, whether it's food, whether it's religious practices. There are ways that you can still reconnect, and it's not too late to find some of those traditions that can be meaningful to you. And I think that's what I've tried to do is for myself, is since music is such a way for me into connecting to my ancestral background, is that's how I've done it. It's not the only way, um, but for me, it's a powerful way, and it's been a really meaningful way to connect to my own family heritage. And I guess um, I just want to encourage people to continue to find those ways and to look for those ways that inspire you from your own ancestral background.
That's beautiful. We should all sample our ancestors.
In however way you can.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Galeet Dardashti. Galeet June Dardashti. This has been a wonderful, rich conversation. And thank you for this, but also for all the wonderful work that you're doing to keep your ancestral cultures alive and to enrich the Jewish community and the world.
Oh, thank you so much for all that you do, Sarah Bunin. Bunin? Did I pronounce it correctly?
Bunin.
Bunin.
Sarah Bunin Benor. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah Bunin Benor, for all of the amazing work that you do with the Jewish Language Project and far beyond.
And then I'll also add that the Jewish Language Project commissioned you, Galit, to record some songs in some of your ancestral languages that we didn't even talk about today, Judeo-Esfahani and Judeo-Hamadani, because those languages are so far removed from your family. Probably your dad didn't even speak any of them, and maybe even your grandpa, right? Grandparents.
No, I'm pretty sure that they didn't. Um, because like I said, it was like the late 1800s where when my family, but who knows, maybe my grandparents um did um know some of those languages, but they may not have, because yeah, I think we many of the kind of city kids that moved to Tehran and other, big cities like that, they just were very disconnected, just like many of us city slickers have become, even further disconnected.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so thank you. And you've inspired me actually to kind of to explore some of those songs that are not even in just mainstream Persian. It's amazing what's out there. So I'm grateful to you for kind of opening my mind to other amazing traditions that I've still not explored
that's
further.
great. Well, if you record more of those songs, please let us know and we will publicize them and post them on our website.
Okay, absolutely. Woohoo.
Well, thank you again, Galit. Have a good day.